Hey, welcome to The Explainer. So today, we're talking about gender inequality, but maybe not in the way you're used to. We're going to look past the social arguments, which are, of course, super important, and frame this as a massive economic issue. We're talking about dollars, cents, and straight-up economic growth that's being left on the table.
So let's just cut to the chase, right? How much is this actually costing the global economy? And let me tell you, we're not talking about small change. The research here shows that the way we misallocate female talent, well, it's putting a huge, measurable brake on global growth. The stakes? They are incredibly high.
And this is the key mental shift we need to make. For so long, this conversation has been all about fairness, all about equity. And look, those things are absolutely vital. But what this new economic research makes crystal clear is that for the people running our economies, finance ministers, central banks, this is a first-order problem. It's about unlocking huge amounts of economic potential. It's not just a social policy. It's a core growth strategy. Okay, so check this out. 24%. What is that? Well, according to the models, that's the potential boost to a country like Egypt's total economic output if all the barriers holding women back were just gone. Just think about that for a second. Imagine adding a quarter of your entire country's economy. That's the mind-boggling scale of the opportunity we're leaving on the table.
All right, Section 1, the global growth gap. So, to really get our heads around this, we're going to need a new way to measure it.
And that brings us to Section 2, demand versus supply. The way the researchers look at it, this whole problem can be broken down into two kind of invisible forces that are holding economies back.
So how do you measure something invisible? Well, economists have built a tool for that. It's called the Global Gender Distortions Index, or the GDDI for short. And you got to understand, this isn't just another survey. Nope, this is a really powerful economic model that lets researchers put a hard number on the problem. It calculates exactly how much productivity is being lost, turning these abstract barriers into something you can actually measure.
Okay, so here are those two forces. On one side, you have demand-side distortions. Think of this like an invisible tax on women who are already in the workforce. We're talking about things like pay gaps, bias in hiring, getting passed over for a promotion. Then you've got the supply-side distortions. This is more like a heavy headwind that women face before they even get in the door. Stuff like the massive burden of unpaid care or social norms that say certain jobs aren't for women.
So the big question is, which one of these is the bigger deal, the headwind or the tax? Well, the research is actually surprisingly clear on this. It's the demand-side stuff, that invisible tax happening inside the market that causes the most economic damage across most countries. So the biggest barriers aren't just about getting women to the starting line, it's about what happens during the race. All right, so we've kind of diagnosed the problem, right? We see the two forces at play. Now let's talk solutions. What actually works? Let's look at the playbook that's emerging from countries that are getting this right. And I want to be clear, this isn't just theory anymore. We're not just spitballing ideas. By actually studying what countries have done, the ones who've made real progress, a super clear playbook is starting to take shape. We can actually see what works and what doesn't.
Just take a look at some of these real-world wins. You've got Japan, with its Womenomics strategy. They did a whole bunch of stuff, expanded childcare, reformed parental leave, and boom, female labor participation shot up by over 10 percentage points. That's huge. Or look at Chile. They did something really practical, free after-school care. The result? More moms in the workforce. And then there's Uruguay, which did something really revolutionary. They started treating care as core infrastructure, just like roads or the power grid.
So what does the full recipe look like? Well, a really pragmatic policy package has 4 key ingredients. Step 1, you treat care as infrastructure, not just social spending. Step 2, at the exact same time, you've got to fix those demand-side problems like bias in pay and promotions. Step 3, you engineer reliability. Make school and work schedules actually line up. And finally, Step 4, you de-risk the whole thing for families with support like safe transportation.
Let's double-click on that idea of care as infrastructure, because it's a real game changer. Uruguay's national care system is the perfect example. They didn't just build a bunch of state-run daycares. No, they built a whole grid of options. Public centers, community care, after-school programs. And by treating care as a shared responsibility between the government, companies, and families,
It does more than just free up women's time. It actually starts to change the culture.
Okay, but here's where things get really interesting. A little bit of a plot twist. All this talk about GDP and boosting growth is great, but it turns out we might be missing a huge piece of the puzzle. We need to look a little closer at what we're actually counting. So, let me ask you a question. Think about this. A woman moves from unpaid work at home, say taking care of her kids, to a paid job in the market. The country's GDP goes up. Everyone cheers, right? But wait a minute, what happened to the value of the work she was doing? Did that childcare suddenly become worthless? Did it just vanish into thin air? The answer to that question really changes how we should think about progress.
So we have two different ways of looking at this. First, there's measured GDP. That's the number you always hear about on the news. The problem is, it completely ignores all the valuable work that happens at home for free. But the GGDI model uses something different, something called welfare-relevant output. It's a much more holistic number that actually includes the value of that home production. It gives you a much truer picture of a society's actual well-being.
And this leads to a pretty fascinating paradox. Check out this data from India. If you remove these gender distortions, the standard GDP number would jump by 17.5%. Awesome. But the actual welfare gain, the real improvement in well-being, is only 14%. So why the difference? Well, it's because when that valuable home production is lost, GDP doesn't subtract it. GDP just sees the new paid job. So in a weird way, GDP actually overstates the true benefit to society. And that is a really crucial distinction to understand.
Which brings us right back to the main point, the central takeaway here. You can't just fix one half of the problem. You can pour money into childcare, that's a supply-side fix, but it's not going to work if women still face bias and pay gaps once they get to the office, the demand-side friction. You absolutely have to tackle both at the same time.
And so, this is the thought I want to leave you with. The real question for policymakers, for all of us, isn't just how do we get more women into the workforce. That's too simple. The real strategic question is, are our solutions solving the care constraint and the bias constraint at the same time? Because what all this data shows, loud and clear, is that tackling both is the only way we're ever going to unlock our full, true economic potential.